retired lieutenant from the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department. Just to recap, here is the FBI statement that we just heard. We do have suggestions that the individual may have leanings toward that particular ideology, that ideology being radical Islam. They just flat out say, we have indications. What could that mean?
Look, I was stunned that that statement was made. I was a member of the National Joint Terrorism Task Force, and I could tell you that these FBI agents are very, very meticulous in how they do things, including statements. A couple of things came to mind. That issue of an international connection wasn't even brought up until Peter Doocy brought the subject up. That troubles me because you would think that would be the first thing that they would want to let out. I'm concerned that, as you said, and you nailed it, Tucker, in this political environment, we've got to be very, very careful what we say, especially in reference to international terrorism connections. I would hope that they have enough indication. We're using words like they're suggesting. I think it's more leaning towards, in my view, and look, obviously I don't have any evidence. It seems like, and we talked about this earlier, a bias incident, some sort of domestic terrorist act, but to tie that in this early in the investigation to a possibility of being internationally connected is troubling.
Could there be another reason that they saved it for the end, you know, rather than just this politically correct culture that we live in, that they wanted to make sure they got all of the other facts about how many were injured, how many have been taken to the hospital, how many potentially could be dead inside, how many officers were involved? I mean, are there other reasons? Yeah,
I wonder if the question was never asked, if it was going to be brought up. It was a question by Peter Doocy that got that out of them.
Well, what's so nutty about it is we heard from like 4 of these guys, if you see something, say something. In order to help the public help law enforcement, shouldn't they be giving out relevant details like that?
Well, look, that stunned me too. They kept on repeating that over and over again. It makes you think, well, maybe there is something more to this than what they're telling us. But they got to be very transparent and very careful what they say.
Indeed. And Steve, do you think, I mean, there's different levels of involvement and networking, that if it really is an Islamic terrorist attack, levels of support that can be provided to an individual. Do you have a sense that because of the way they were talking about it, whereas it could be a politically correct way of walking around the subject, but it could also be, hey, we think this was an individual who was acting alone, radicalized, but acting alone. Could that be part of their calculation?
Yes, it could be. The fact is they don't know. But if there is, in fact, an international connection, and we've said this all along, we're at war. We've said the war is coming to this country. Whether it be a lone wolf who has an ideology connected to international terrorism or not is really immaterial. The fact is that terrorism is here, and it's here in the United States, and we've got to deal with it. I would only hope that they'd be a little bit more careful in bringing to the public issues like this before making statements like that with solid evidence.
Or straightforward.
Straightforward. You got to be straightforward. Look, years ago, politically correct, don't tell the public, they'll panic. We're not going to panic anymore. We know what's going on. We need the truth. And we need it based on solid evidence.
And yet, in the wake of the San Bernardino shootings, when they knew instantly that this was inspired, they had to have known it was inspired by radical Islam. These people had a long trail. They didn't say it for a long time.
Well, that's right, because they didn't have the evidence that they needed to say it. But I've got to tell you, I go back to the FBI agent, no law enforcement officer in those interviews said anything about that until Peter Doocy brought the subject up. It was an answer to a question.
Well, so I'm just worried that politics are interfering with the job of law enforcement.
Well, Tucker,
wouldn't you want to know?
Well, the FBI, I could tell you, they're the best in the business. I would hope that the agent was authorized to say that. I would hope he was. And if he was, well, then they may have enough evidence.
Yeah, and I remember covering the San Bernardino shooting and being in that neighborhood and hearing that a neighbor said, you know, I noticed some bizarre activity going on at this home at night, and I was scared to say anything because I was worried about being seen as Islamophobic.
Well, that's right, and I think that's the key. People have to, if they see something, to say something. Don't worry about being labeled a stereotype, because you may end up saving lives.
Indeed.
That is important.
Which is why the see something, say something shouldn't be code. Not to indict anybody that was at that press conference. They're doing the best they can in the moment.
They are.
But it can't be code, and it's got to be, if you see something that looks suspicious and has ties to this or looks like this, be willing to talk about it.
And tell us what your evidence is. You know, without compromising the investigation, just say, look, this is what we found on him. This is why we believe there may be an international connection.
Sure.
It's such a good point. Why wouldn't they do that?
Well, because they may not have. They just may not have the evidence. It just may have been, you know, sometimes we say things on the air that come out the wrong way, but
no, this was pretty. I've got the quote right here. He said, we have suggestions, flat out, we have suggestions the individual may have leanings towards that.
Suggestions, Tucker, not evidence.
Right, but wouldn't it be helpful to say, here's what the suggestions were?
Well, yeah, but he should have never said it to begin with, in my view, unless you have absolute evidence. And again, I give credit to Peter Doocy to getting that information out, if in fact it is true.
Yeah, and he said that they have found a car that they believe is the gunman's, and they're trying to sweep that as well as the nightclub, because the gunman apparently, along with his assault type of rifle that he was carrying and a handgun, had some sort of device. So they're working to see if that is a real device and if there are others.
Exactly, which is interesting because they're still in the evidence gathering mode.
Yeah, they said no credible further threat is what they said.
Well, that's right. Now, there's no credible further threat because they no doubt believe that maybe there's not a cell involved. It could be leaning towards domestic terrorism. But the point is they're still gathering evidence. They have to look at his computer, his cell phones, and his background, see if anyone knew him, interview them. It's just startling to me that they would come out this early in the investigation and say there is a suggestion of international terrorism.
They better be right.
We're going to keep you here for more insight. Steve Rogers. But right now we are going to